Hello and welcome to the Ray Show podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and we are recording now in beautiful downtown Athens, Georgia, on a lovely spring day here in early May. Today on the show, we have Jarboe. You will know Jarboe from her prolific and amazing solo career, her work in Swans, and also many collaborative projects such as her work with Neurosis, Yesu, and countless others. So it is an honor to be speaking to Jarboe, and she has been always an artistic giant in my life. And just so many records I could name, just her work on Illusory. If you want to name something recent that really speaks to me. I urge you to go down the rabbit hole of all of her vast catalog. And we'll be getting to that chat here in just a little bit. But yes, just want to catch everybody up. We are now back and going to be rolling episodes at you weekly. I'll be out in Los Angeles next week at the Cruel World Festival. So I hope to see some of you out there. Come up and say hello if you see me walking around. We also will be announcing the live podcast tapings that we will be doing with a collaboration with Cine here in Athens, Georgia. This will be live streamed out and all over our socials and everything like that. So you'll be able to participate if you're not here in Athens proper. But that will be coming up soon. You will see some GoFundMe stuff on the socials. So we are in need of some equipment. So if you can give, please do. If you can't, I totally understand, and I still love you to pieces. But without further ado, let's get to our talk with Jarboe. Everybody, we have Jarboe on the podcast today. How are you doing, Jarboe?
I'm fine. I'm always active and busy and overscheduled and taking on too many projects. All that's me.
Right. Well, we're all the better for that. So, but I want to start out, towards the beginning of your professional career, and I've always wanted to ask you this: what is the first thing you remember when you got to New York to join Swans? What's your first memory of that time?
Oh, the very first memory would be the fact that no taxi cab would even take you to Avenue A. So, and that I was going into, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the entire United States. So I had a friend accompany me. It was someone going to school up there who had been going to Georgia Tech. And so he was up there getting further education after his degree from Tech. And so he accompanied me to, Alphabet City, to East Village. And so we had to stop at and he told me to wear a big bulky coat. So we're both wearing these big bulky coats, and it was March and wasn't that cold. But that was to disguise yourself, to look scary. so it was interesting. It was kind of like a spy movie. We had to stop at a phone booth. Remember those?
Oh God,
on
yes.
the street.
Such an archaic
on the
thing.
street corner. On the street corner, and it was Avenue A, and I think it was 7th Street. We had to stop in the street corner, and we had to make a phone call to where Harry Crosby and Michael Jarboe were living, an apartment building, and then walk over there and meet them. And then we were I was invited to a rehearsal. So the rehearsal was where I wound up living, 6 and B, and so I wasn't allowed into the actual room where they were rehearsing. I had to sit outside, and this was free. This is raw space. This was absolutely unadorned, raw warehouse space, and it had no amenities. It had no no bathing facilities. It had no kitchen. It had
Right.
it had no heat. It had no air conditioning. It was just a raw cement warehouse space. So that I sat in there, and this music was so loud coming from the rehearsal room. The whole area was shaking, and it was really exciting.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so that was the first memory for me, would simply be the fact that I didn't even know that neighborhood existed. I'd been to New York many times, and that it was so dangerous. The taxi cab wouldn't even take you to Avenue
Oh.
A, and that you were taking your life in your hands heading in that direction.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So that would be my very first memory, was this hidden, terrifying neighborhood.
Well, yeah, you and Michael lived in what became known as the bunker that was
Yes,
on
that's the space I'm talking about. That was
Avenue.
the rehearsal
That was
space.
yes.
And
Um,
this was basically, I think, when it was originally designed, this building, this must have been a storage area, because it was basically just a cement. It had no windows, it had nothing. And so there was someone cut a little tiny up near the top part of the wall, had cut in a area to put in an old Radley air conditioning unit, which was really nasty, really old, didn't work.
right.
And so that was in a cage that sat out over the sidewalk. And so that was the only, and then in the wintertime that we would stuff that with comforters and quilts and everything you could think of in there to keep the cold air out.
Yeah.
And but in the summertime you would take all that stuff out of there, and that was your only outside that was your only outside experience, was that that cage on the outside of this air conditioning unit. And then we built a wall separating, there was a wall separating the different areas. And so that was one of the first things we did, was we put up walls and a ladder to a loft area for a sleeping quarter. And my mother got us a little tiny refrigerator. I had a hot plate. That was the kitchen. And we put in what Michael literally dug in the ground, the laying out pipes to put in a toilet.
That's
And
insane.
then we got a plastic shower, and put a toilet in there. And so I mean, it was all done from raw space. And we put in electric wires across the ceiling to have electricity in the place, in the living space. And yeah, it was all DIY,
Yeah.
and very, very raw, and very, very hard. The summers were brutal. They were so hot. When I joined and we started rehearsing in there, I would be wearing like a little swimsuit, a little bikini swimsuit, and the band would just be in there in their shorts with no top, because it was so hot you couldn't, you were just drenched. And then in the wintertime, you wear two sets of LL Bean long underwear, and you would never take those off the entire winter.
Wow.
And if I wanted to take a bath or shower, I'd have to walk to one of my friends' apartments in a tenement building, and they had that steam radiator heat. So it got to be, extremely hot in those apartments. So I'd go in there, and that would be where I would bathe. Because the thing about the bunker was you had to decide what you wanted to do with the electric. You could either bought a plug-in electric radiator heater with the oil that circulates in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would have to put a pan of water on top of that to keep the space from being tolerable in terms of humidity. And so you would either have the heat on, or you could turn on the hot plate, or you could use the shower to get the little hot water heater going. You couldn't do all of those at once because you'd blow the fuses.
Right.
So then we'd have to, and of course the fuse box was underneath the ground of the building. So you'd have to pull up the metal plate on the outside in the sidewalk. And then you'd have to climb down underneath the street and go underneath the building.
Oh.
And there would be planks of wood standing over standing water. And of course, rats. and then you would go down there with the flashlight, and then you'd have to put in to replace the fuses. It was really
Oh
horrible.
my God. That sounds like a hellscape. I mean, how many times do you guys blow fuses?
All the time.
Gosh.
And yeah, and of course we had, you had your friendly local neighborhood electrician. We had the friendly local neighborhood locksmith. And these guys were, your regular, they came over and they did whatever you needed them to do, but they were just neighborhood guys, I don't know. They were licensed or not. They were just experts. And everybody had, this whole area then was artists with no money helping each other out. I mean, it was just like a community.
Yeah.
And it was all DIY. I mean, the whole situation was DIY, and it's a completely different area now. I mean, now it's just like going to a shopping mall. I mean, it's just
yeah.
It's so cleaned up. And one of the streets in the neighborhood there, someone told me recently the rent was $10,000 a month. So God. I mean, it's just it's completely different, and I'm very happy that I got to experience the danger and the community, because the valuable lessons that you get from that. It makes you extremely tough. It makes you extremely hardened and strong, and you can take more, because you've been through so much. And I learned so much. I had so many lessons, and it just kind of makes you hard as nails, And so I think that these were really valuable experiences.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a super intense environment at that time.
Extremely intense, and you got to realize that like some of the when I worked with Larry LeMay at his home studio for Beautiful People Limited, and he worked on some of the stuff for Sacrificial Cake and Anhedoniac. We'd rehearse all. I mean, we would be working all night long, and his whole studio was built by hand with, what he had bought from Radio Shack, and he had this incredible genius ability to make machines and to repair things that were broken. So we would be working all night, and then when it was time for me to go back, he was on 2nd Street. For me to go back to 6th Street, you had to take Avenue A. You couldn't take B because you wouldn't make it alive. You wouldn't get back. And so these kind of hard to really explain to anybody that wasn't there just how dangerous it was. I wrote, this is taken from journal entries. I wrote the lyrics for a song I did with Justin on the Yezu, album. And the song is called Storm Coming On. And these lyrics are actual facts. I mean, they're truth. There's nothing made up about that at all. And it was like, one of the lines was, stepping over needles and puddles of piss. This is every single day. You'd open up the big steel door of the bunker, and there would be hypodermic needles. There'd be some man urinating.
Oh my God! Welcome to New York.
And then going to the post office on 14th Street, because, we shipped a whole lot of packages coming and going, and for the band. And so I'd walk down to the post office and have to lug back all this stuff. And just nonstop of men parked along the side of the road would whisper things to me and try to entice me, into their car, and just constant harassment from these sort of unsavory characters.
Yeah. And you're still in the big coat, right? You're still kind of.
Yeah, Michael and I both wore big coats. He would wear, like, the worst part of August or July. You'd see him walking along, Avenue A. He'd be wearing a ankle-length black wool coat. I mean, it was just a different era, And the thing is that I think the idea was, even if you wore a baggy cloth coat, when it was hot. I think the idea was then you didn't know if you were concealing a weapon or not, and so,
Right.
and so it
Yeah.
was just kind of survival mode. But all my training and classes that I had at Georgia State for boxing, for Bondo boxing, or kickboxing, I think that these came in handy, because I learned how my teacher said that the fingers that stay together slay together, and
Yes.
so I would walk down the middle of the road because we're always doing these activities, whether it was going to performances or working in studios. You'd always find yourself at 3, 4 in the morning walking down the middle of the road. And because you didn't want to walk on the sidewalk because someone could grab you. So you had to walk in the middle of the road with your fingers together. And to my credit, I was never mugged. I think I looked like I would take your head off if you tried to come near me.
Right.
So yeah, and then Michael taught me the prison walk where you're walking down the middle of the road, and it's kind of a lurch kind of a walk where you're swinging a bottle. You stop into the bodega and buy something in a glass bottle, and then you would just be swinging that as you walk down the road because that's a weapon. So the skill set that you pick up.
Yes.
I had a giant crucifix on my keychain, and we had, of course, because they sold those had a knife inside there, and so and then you learn like nervous tics and weird kinds of behavior, so that you realize you develop these eyes all around your head, like in the back of your head. You can tell when someone's checking you out, like they're going to mug you. So you start developing physical symptoms that are acting to make that person think that you're unhealthy or you're crazy,
Right.
so that they don't mug you. Because the problem, see, was when you got to the door, the bunker door, it had police lock, it had several deadbolts. So it took a while to get in that door because there's so many locks to undo.
Yeah.
So that's when you're vulnerable, when you'd be vulnerable standing there at these locks. You never want to look like you're fumbling, you want to look like and so you might want to develop some kind of, jittery kind of behavior then, so that people might think you're not the best person to try to mug.
Right. Right. Well, what was it exactly about Swans? I know that you got a hold of their first album, or listened or had heard it on radio. What was it about Swans that attracted you to their music?
Well, the sound itself was just majestic, and I found it to be extremely powerful, and I found it to be unlike anything I'd ever heard in my entire life. It was completely original, and I liked the mantra-like repetition. At the time, I was lifting weights, and so it really helped with my workouts. I put it on, and I did get the album. I borrowed it, quote unquote, from WREK, and
Yes.
I had the station copy for quite some time. I befriended some of the people working at the station, and I had it for quite some time. And of course, they'd already put it on their cart because they had a cart system, so they had the album on the cart, and where they could play it. And so the actual physical album in the back room there was, I got the station copy. I couldn't find it anywhere. It wasn't available anywhere. At Wax and Tracks, nobody had it. So I had to borrow that copy. And then I read on the back, the whole thing started with I read on the back asking for the lyric sheet because there was an address you could write on the back. And so some months went by, and I finally got this lyric sheet folded up with a stamp on it, and there was a note on the back from Michael saying, here's this lyric sheet, such that it is, and so I wrote back with what I was doing at the time, performing I was doing at the time, and the tape projects I was making at the time. I sent him audio that I was doing at the time, and then we were doing a little zine we're making at Kinko's, and so the zine, we decided, let's interview Swans, the zine. So I went up there on a trip, and that's when I was invited to the rehearsal. So that's how the whole thing started. And I really, when I met Michael and talked with him, I was impressed with just how intelligent he was, how articulate he was, how educated he was. And it just blew my mind. That's when I realized that this is an art, and I told him that this is an art project. And he said, no, an art project. I think we're a rock band. And I was like, oh no, you're an artist and this is an art project. Because see, that's how I saw it. And that's how I continue to see it.
Oh, yeah.
And and of course, that would be the typical thing he would say, would be to downplay it. So to say, oh no, I think we're a rock band. That's his typical type of approach to that's how he is. He's very, very would come back with something like making it less lofty, less, you know what I mean? He's not going to do that. He's going to put it baseline and say, oh no, it's just a rock band.
Right. Well, given how, once you joined the band and started performing with them, given how physically and emotionally draining a Swans show was and is, you were also moving and setting up the equipment each day and night. What kind of toll did that take on you?
Well, there was like a year or so of just, I mean, it was like being the gopher, the person that hauled the, I would go get the press kit copied, because then it was all paper, of course, and answered the fan mail and mailed off promos, and I mean it was a lot of that kind of thing, sorting through his writing and organizing stuff, and so it was a long time. But the '84 tour, which I was on, was a real oh my God, that was trial by fire. Here I was vegan. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I was an exercise nut. I lifted weights. I wore, wrestling boots and leotards. I mean, and I had a buzz cut. So here I am, traveling in a van with everybody smoking,
Ugh.
and they were drunks beyond belief. I mean, I've never had seen, it was unbelievable alcohol consumption. And so they would just get extremely drunk, smoking, just hellraisers. And so I kind of felt like I held down the fort, like I held on to passports. I carried drum kits up and down steps. I did things like that. And I think the fact that I held it together and didn't succumb to any of that, I never would. I think I was, considered tough enough. I hope, I don't know,
Yeah.
at least in some ways, because I'm actually extremely sensitive, introverted, shy, and quiet. So it's kind of like, it's a weird dichotomy, So I think that in terms of physical strength, he thought I was, I could handle it. But that's just physically. I mean, emotionally, it was extremely difficult. And I wanted to be part of it. He told me he wanted a bass. And so I was getting ready to buy and teach myself how to play bass, because, their bass playing wasn't, I mean, it wasn't that complicated, a bass playing. So I thought I could do that. So then it changed when Harry quit the band. And then it became, he was rolling with a foot pedal sounds from a cassette deck on stage. And so then it was like, instead of using cassettes, making sounds louder and softer with the foot pedal, controlling a cassette deck, let's, create those sounds. So around this time, the sampling keyboard had just come out in Sonic Mirage. So I got the very first Sonic sampling Mirage keyboard.
Oh,
and
man.
so then there was no monitor like computers have. It was all a digital readout of parameters, mathematical equations, mathematical numbers.
Right.
So it comes with this giant, notebook with all kinds of parameter settings of how to change sounds. So then you record stuff into it and you alter it. So that was a huge learning curve.
Oh,
So-
to say the least.
because you don't see it. It's just like numbers, so you can't see any waveforms or anything.
Oh
You can't
gosh.
see files. So so that was what I was supposed to play. So I did that, and of course the calzone road case was, I think, more expensive than the instrument. I don't know. I remember the keyboard was like, I think it was 1,200, and then the calzone road case. So after this investment, I learned that it's extremely loud. Controlling the volume of it was, all of that was so complicated. So then that was the first tour, no singing, just me playing that. So that tour was skinhead clubs, you know, just all male audience.
Yeah.
Um, no one believed I was in the group. I, several instances, was kicked and thrown downstairs and all this kind of stuff because they didn't believe that I was in the group. And, very interesting. And of course, constantly yelled at, harassed, um, treated in a disrespectful way by the audience.
That's
Because
unforgivable.
this is the days of hardcore punk. This is like this is a different era. So yeah, so that was the first touring experience with that stuff. And so yes, sure, that we didn't have roadies, we didn't have the money for roadies, so yeah, you'd have to break everything down and put it, and I very early on had a sense of, there was the persona performer, and then there was the person rolling up cables and packing up the gear. And so I would change clothes. I put on a cap, I'd put on a jacket. I would be a different person when I was doing that than the person that you saw me performing, playing the
Yeah.
keyboard. So I always did that. I still maintain that to this day, where there's the person putting on the show, and then there's the person who's, behind the scenes, but there they are on stage rolling up the gear. So, but it was hardcore, especially I've talked about this road case and this keyboard as early tours of Europe. This thing was valuable, and it was sensitive to heat and cold. And so you couldn't leave it in the van, even if you parked it where the back door up against the wall so no one could break in. I had to bring this thing inside. And so we'd play we'd stay in these hotels around Europe. Like there was this one in Amsterdam, the Quentin it was called. So that one, the staircase was basically straight up. So I would literally have to get on my, knees and lay prone and inch it up,
Oh
and
goodness.
move it, and then and no one would help you, of course. So you have to pull this thing up into your room for the night. So this was really a lot of the job was moving this gear around. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. That sounds hellish. Um,
Yeah.
but I like you said about living in the bunker, I'm sure this made you tough as nails and just, I mean, bulletproof in every way.
Well, it was a real joy when we finally started getting a roadie, and then it got to the point where we had a roadie, and we had a driver, and we had a merch person and a tour manager, and that changes everything, because it's people taking some of the burden off of you when you're on the road. So the last, the training experience became joyous when that came on board.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the early days, the early days were interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit before Swans and then get to your solo career because I want to talk about that. There's just so much to digest, so much amazing art. Um, you've mentioned leaving a loving environment to join Swans from where you came. What did that environment consist of at that point in your life? Was it just your family and a great group of friends, or what was that? Could you paint a picture of what you left to go into that situation with Swans?
Well, first of all, my best friend, and that was my mother. And so, I mean, she was everything to me. She was a mentor. We were just really, really close. And I think that was the hardest part. You know, and really, yeah, I can't even find the words to describe how wonderful she was. So that was the hardest, and that was something I did not want to to leave. And I had a whole circle of artist friends at that time, and so yeah, so it was a community, you know, a community of supportive friends who were doing creative, wonderful things. And I had a person in town who was somewhat important in the art community, and he wanted me to go into more performance art and doing gallery installations and that kind of thing. So I think if I'd gone that direction, it would have been a very different life. I'm not sure it would have been a better one, but it was, but I mean, I was starting to go in that direction on my own, and you know, vocal performances, manipulating the sound of the voice, and this kind of thing, and performance, like a severe performance. So that whole world, you know, it didn't. There was a competition there, you know, in terms of internal dialogue.
Right.
And I decided that I had this, you know, opportunity that was a challenge, and it was a severe challenge. And so I thought, well, you know, I have to rise to this challenge, and so I'm going to do it. And so I think it was the fact that it was just such a strong challenge to go up there where I knew no one, and just to start as a completely unknown entity, you know, with no friends, and of course all everyone knew about me was, you know, where I was from, and so of course there was a tremendous amount of bias,
Right.
and I think that yeah, tremendous amount of bias, where no one well, zero respect because of the fact of where you're from. So you kind of have to kind of prove yourself from the get-go, because no one respects you, and everyone kind of laughs at you behind your back because of where you're from. So that was my experience. And people would say things like, "Oh well, you know, this place, this horrible bar or whatever." Like, "Oh, but you don't have anything like Blanche's down there," and I'd say, "Oh well, actually." And then I would mention a bar that was on Ponce de Leon where people were regularly murdered with guns, you know. so,
Yeah.
so I'd mention, well, actually, we do have that. And so I think it was just kind of like this attitude of, oh, well, you know, you're just, you know, you're not from the mean streets of New York City. You're not from LA, so you're not important at all. So I think it was kind of that is what I faced.
Well,
And I realized there was a huge group of what you call expats. I mean, there was a large group I began to realize that had moved to New York. The Southerners had moved to New York, and so I mean, I think that every Southerner at that time moving up there had to face a tremendous bias.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the interesting thing for me was, Um, I had traveled extensively. You know, I'd been to Europe several times. I'd been to Manhattan, I don't know how many times. I'd been to Lincoln Center and the Met. I'd sat in a box next to Jackie Kennedy looking at the opera. I
Oh
mean,
goodness.
I had been to every Broadway show. I mean, I was a very traveled, educated person. And yet, because I was born and raised, you know, in the South, that art scene, that music art scene there in the East Village seemed to think that dismiss me, I would say, and you know, and so there's a lot of bias and sexism would be what I'd faced.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how do you feel growing up in the South has influenced your art?
Well, what I've always said when people have asked me that question is that the one that I grew up in embraced eccentricity, and I think that without a lot of the people that I remember as a child in Mississippi and New Orleans, I don't think I'd be the person I am today.
Right.
I I met a lot of really interesting people as a child, and that was my first experience seeing, performers on the street and the Mardi Gras, and I had a lot of, women when I was a little kid that were just amazing and motivated me, and they were they were from that region. I mean, so I think that there's if you look at a city like NOLA, I mean, it's the heart of creativity and so much music and theater that this is something that has a tremendous power on a child to influence them. So I think that I would say that it only encouraged me.
Well, what was the teenage Jarboe listening to? Are there any like live performances that you witnessed that kind of turned you on to being a performer?
Well, what I read early on was that your youth is, well, I would say it's pretty much your whole life, but especially when you're in school, that it's intake. And then you get to you outtake. So it's in, create, learn, get the information in there, and then put something out in the world. So I saw every damn thing there was. I mean, there wasn't anything I didn't say no to. I had no bias. I saw it all, and any performance. I would go see all the performances in the park at Piedmont Park, and I would go to all of the concerts and all of the shows. It seems to me that some of the early shows, they didn't care how old you were to get in to see the shows. Perhaps they didn't sell alcohol in those days. But I think that I just saw everything that there was. I mean, one of the shows that I saw that impressed me, and of course I traveled too. I would go to see relatives and the relatives that lived up around Maryland and so in Virginia. And so I would go see, everybody. I saw James Taylor at a coffee house. I mean, I would see everybody. I saw, pretty sure it was Deep Purple and Spooky Tooth.
Right.
At a very small Coliseum, the Georgia Tech campus. So, I mean, I think I saw pretty much, everything that would come through. I was still like, God, I mean, was I even in high school yet? I mean, I was just a little kid, and I saw I don't know, Savoy Brown, James Gang. I saw Ellis Cooper. I mean, I've seen everybody, really. I've seen every show. As a kid, I was just constantly absorbing and going things. I'd be sneaking out of the house. My parents didn't know. I'd snuck out of the house, and I'd go and see things and hang out with people. I had developed a group of friends as I got older that would gather at this cabin, and we would, they'd play guitar, and we'd all sing and play guitar, and so that was formative too. Being around a bunch of musicians.
Right. Well, you're an amazing keyboardist, and I don't think it gets mentioned enough. How do you feel your relationship with the instrument is evolved over these years of playing live and just, collecting all these experiences?
Well, for me, it's there's a sense of restraint. Like I don't respond to too much flourish. I like a sense of discipline and restraint, and that comes from all the years in Swans where Michael repeatedly said, too many notes, strip it down, too many notes. And so this would be with my singing, with playing. And looking back, I understand, that I continue to perhaps to be too many notes, but I'm trying, I continually try to take away rather than add to, and I think that my relationship with it changed when we got out of the the whole time I was in Swans, we were in the big studio system. So, big professional recording studios, expensive reel-to-reel tapes, massive budgets to do an album. And I think I began to think about the fact that you could, as technology came on to the scene, that you could buy this technology, you could buy computers, you could buy different devices, and you could record at home, and you could have a home studio, and then you could bring an album in for, I don't know, under $150,000 for a
Right.
small indie album. And so you figure our budgets were astronomical. And then Michael still operates that way. He has the idea that he raises funds to create a new album. And so his albums, I think, are still extremely expensive comparatively to, doing something completely at home or in a home studio. And my relationship with keyboard changed when I saw it as a tool to, use a studio and a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you add organic sounds to what you're accessing with the recording program. And I like the idea of architecture now too, more than anything. I think my forte for me, right, would be mixing. And I think that I like to chop and create, manipulate files.
Right.
So this is a process that can take months to get what you want. And it's very minute. And it involves stretching files, looking at them, editing them, manipulating them, moving them around, changing the waveform. And
Yeah.
so this is the thing I love.
Well, in 1991, just to kick it off, you released the 13 Masks. I mean, what sticks out in your mind from that time? This first kind of full length on your own, if you don't consider, what how difficult was that to transition to that?
The first Skin album was technically my first solo album, and Michael, enjoyed it so much he wanted to do one. So then it became a project, and the whole idea was it was the singer and the song, the focus on the vocal performance, not a slab of sound, not a wall of sound like Swans is doing. So I think that I would consider that the first, and I began to meet different musicians, and so I was constantly stimulated creatively because I was working in Swans, and so when you're working in an environment like that, you have so many creative ideas is just kind of like spilling out of you. I mean, you're sleeping and breathing sound, and so you need an outlet to get it to express it. And I think that this was because my ideas were so stimulated and so activated that this led to a series of solo albums the entire time I was in Swans.
Yeah.
And they would all go out drinking after rehearsal, and I would stay behind alone, and I would work on the keyboard. I had a little Casio that I used to compose with, and so I'd sit there and I would just be working and writing music by myself. So that's how all that started. Was just I'd stay behind. I never was part of that. I wasn't. I was the loner, and so I stayed behind and I worked on songs and by myself. So this is what led to then putting it on an album, and then that one thing led to another, where that just all these creative ideas. And the thing for me was they were always people criticized, saying, oh well, things should be more cohesive and should basically all sound like the same kind of song, the same kind of music. And I could never do that. I still can't do that. Like, I think it's fine to have radically diverse, eclectic sounds on an album. And you don't have to, the whole thing does not have to be pop. The whole thing does not have to be dance. The whole thing does not, you can just do one. And so that's, I think, what is if there's a style, that's my style. It's the eclecticism.
And that's to me what makes you so compelling of an artist. I mean, everything, just about all your records, it's just a journey. You know, you take a like Sacrificial Cake. There's a lifetime in that record. I mean, it's a perfect example to me of like the journey, the changing on a dime that your records do. Um, Speaking of that record, there's a rumored vinyl release planned for Sacrificial Cake.
That's going on right now. This company wrote me, and they had written my friends, um, Monica Richards and William Faith. They had a band called Faith in the Muse, and they were working with this company. And so when I saw that and Lisa Hammer, whom I know because when she was working with Adult Swim, she was the one that was responsible for giving me the job of doing the Southern Maid on that episode of the Venture Brothers. And so when I saw that Lisa Hammer and that Faith in the Muse had worked with this company, I thought, well, okay, that gives them cred for me. So this company, they're in Greece. This company is doing a vinyl of Sacrificial Cake. I'm working with the mastering engineer right now to try to get the sound that I want for it, because of course, and also I'm trying to figure out what happened to the master for the vinyl when it was put out with Drainland.
Right.
And if that exists somewhere. I was just writing Michael when you called, asking him if he had some idea of the whereabouts of that, because that would be interesting to see, because I don't even remember what form that master was on. Was right. But I think that he's mastering from a CD right now, so we'll see how that goes. But that's supposed to happen. It's happening right now, and that's supposed to be out on Lavender vinyl.
Okay. Lavender.
And it's called the Circle music. The Circle meaning record, because they only do records.
Right. Well, when you're doing stuff, when you're going back on mastering and going back, revisiting some of your work, given the diaristic nature of your work and the field recordings you have accumulated and put into your music, how does this affect you when you revisit some of these albums?
Rather than it affect me in that way, I think what I notice is a curious wondering what state of mind I was in when I when I conceived something or performed something. And I think that there was a certain amount of deep emotional vitriol that went into a lot of this work. And it just, to me, looks like someone growing and learning, and, someone just really kind of stretching and exploring who they are and what they are doing with their voice and with their songwriting. And Sacrificial Cake is a really good example, because it goes from a very sensual song about, from the point of view of a mistress, who's having an affair, and then there's a scene of violence in it, and she runs for the knife, and so I mean there's kind of, and then she's kind of in this daze of how she wound up in this situation, and so it goes from that to then something like Yum Yab, which is extremely violent, and it's a metaphor. It's not literally slash your wrist. It's not literally do this to yourself. It's a metaphor for the whole, like Natural Born Killers. I mean, it was inspired by this idea of metaphor of anger and intensity and violence, and it was kind of exploring that emotion.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that when I look back at it, I look at, wow, like I was in a really intense place to embody that, and so certainly with Anhedoniac, it's the same way. I mean,
absolutely.
And I remember I used to have this argument with this particular artist who would say, well, you don't you don't use something as catharsis because that's self-indulgent, and you don't write diaristically because that's self-indulgent. And so I've decided through the years I disagree with that, because these are universal human experiences, and the more personal, the more real you are, the more people relate to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I no longer think that there's anything to be ashamed of if to say, oh, well, you were, writing from the heart, therefore you can't call yourself an artist. Well, I disagree. So I think that when I look back at these records, I see that they were sincere, that there was nothing tongue in cheek. It was absolutely intended. So I'm glad that I stuck to my agenda with that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, changing gears a little bit, you worked with Attila from Mayhem on a song "The Soul Continues" off of Mahakali.
Mm-hmm.
How did this collaboration come about? That just fascinates me.
Well, we performed that live twice.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. The first time we performed it was at the Inferno Fest in Oslo, Norway.
Oh, wow.
And he is someone I really love. He's so talented, void of voices. His solo performance is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my entire life. He's trained. I mean, he does opera lessons and opera scales and kind of things to keep his voice intact. He's a really serious vocalist. He can do the metal, but he can do anything. I mean, he's truly a magnificent performer. But it came about, let's see, I was in New York, I was recording Mahakali. And I was working with somebody who had a connection to Season of Mist Records in Europe. And so we were discussing different performers that I wanted an eclecticism of some of these songs, and I wanted a male singer. And so that's when his name came up. And so I talked with him, and he, agreed to do it. And he loved it. I mean, he said he loved it. He loved working with a female voice on the same song. And then we became friends. We saw each other in Europe. And so I considered him a good friend. And he's a really sweet guy. And on the same subject, Philip Anselmo was a real joy to get to know, and he agreed to sing on the Mahakali. And I threw down the gauntlet with him. I was like, I want you to sing, completely raw, like your Southern Louisiana voice, and I don't want effects on it, and I want it, just completely natural. And he did that, and it's kind of astonishing. And that's one of my favorite songs as well. What he did is great, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have a lot of toes in that. You have a lot of connections to the world of metal. What attracts you to like extreme metal?
I don't even look at it that way. Like the Men album, I sang with Alan Sparhawk. I mean, I don't really, I don't care for one genre over the next. I don't even look at it that way.
Right.
I look at a particular performer or a particular song, or a particular delivery. And I wouldn't say that I have a connection to rock or to metal. I think I just see these as people that I've gotten to know, and I really found them to be very just great, at least in my inner. I mean, another group that I really love would be Stephen O'Malley's performance group, Sun, and I've seen them live several times, and they're also, very majestic, and just profound and beautiful. So these are all unique, performances and unique approaches to sound, and so I think I wouldn't say I like a particular genre.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any? Here's one more question with that. You worked with Solitude on "Horses in the Ground" from their album "Sister." Do you remember? Do you have any recollections of working with them?
I love those boys. Of course, they aren't together anymore, but
Yes.
Heinke is a really a dear friend, and he's performed with me on stage when I went over to Sweden, and he's someone I really love. And of course, he was in Ghost briefly, and
Yeah.
so I went down there to see them perform at the Tabernacle, and I had never heard of the group before and had no expectations at all. And so when I went in there, I thought to myself, well, I hope there's at least a couple of hundred people here. and,
Yeah.
and then I got down there and there's a line of people trying to get
Oh
in.
yeah.
And um, and so that was an interesting experience, a very terrifying audience. I felt like I was in a cult. Uh,
That's
won't be
good.
seeing that performance, won't be seeing them again. And yeah, so it's interesting, but he's not working with them anymore.
No, no, yeah.
But yeah, so that came about again. There's this the man that had connections to some of these labels. He was their manager at one point, and so that's how that happened. Was he asked me to, and then they were writing me, and we got to be friends. And they when they came through, got to hang out with them, and so yeah. So I love Heinke. He's a brilliant musician.
Absolutely. Um, well, let's get back to your solo, your current work. Atulpa is your latest full length release. What does that title mean to you?
Well, I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism now for most of my entire life. And so this is my use of it is it means manifestation.
Hmm.
So the implication is that these songs are manifestations. They are life forms.
Yeah, yeah, and this record you talked earlier. We were talking about Sacrificial Cake, the cinematic quality. This album especially has a cinematic quality. Like I love how the vocals come back at the end of Fate Cinema. How did this album come manifest itself? I mean, what was
It was a follow-up to Illusory,
yes,
and I have to say Illusory is my favorite album that I've ever done. And
really?
I worked on it so hard. I did architecture on it. I did extreme vocals on it, and really kind of speaking in tongues. And I carried that idea over to Atalpa, to the idea that the voice is channeling. And so it's not words per se that are recognizable. They're emanations.
Mhm.
So this is an idea that I really, really like. And that's something that I'm probably going to continue to do, as well as like I did on Illusory, revisiting an older song. So revisiting Man of Hate
Yeah.
seemed really appropriate at the time that I reworked it for Illusory. And of course, it's still appropriate. It's even more appropriate now. Of course, at the time I reworked it thinking about Trump. And then when I reworked it again, I reworked it again for the tour, and then I had somebody else in mind. But now it's pretty obvious who it would be about now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I may hold off on doing that on the tour if our tour actually happens. But the tour, I wanted to say the tour has changed. That my concept of it has changed, which is going to be really good because it's going to force me to have another skill set. And so now instead of the keyboard sounds, I'm sitting at the keyboard again. I'm going full Les Mort on this thing. Yeah, so I'm going to be MacBook Pro, and I'll
Nice.
probably use MainStage instead of, yeah, I'm probably going to be using MainStage, but it's going to be manipulating sounds and playing sounds with the controller keyboard, and that's going to be a totally new world and for the show.
Right, right. Well, you're such a prolific artist. I mean, if this exists, what does an average day in your life look like to maintain this quality of work?
Someone else asked me that on the publicity jaunt that I just did, which is daily. Yes, exercise. That's the first thing I do. Um, I get up. I make espresso with. I only use oat milk, which I foam up,
Nice.
and then I down that, and then I get on the Rogue Echo bike, and that became my really good friend during the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, the park was closed.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you couldn't even go running. So now that's like my love. So I have the Rogue Echo bike, and then I also have an incline treadmill. So it's like you're constantly climbing on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the first thing I do is I do 10 miles on the bike.
Wow.
And I do that every single day, 7 days a week.
What?
And I keep challenging myself. And I use um, I subscribe to Apple Fitness, and so I have fitness instructors that I use for
Yeah.
the bike or for the treadmill or any other exercise, you know. So I constantly meet the goals and the challenges that I've set for myself. So I think it's really important to do that first thing is to just put yourself through extreme exercise.
Right.
And then you get your blood going and you're done. You feel full of energy.
Um,
So that's the first thing I do, and I make sure I do that every single day.
well, that's got it. That's yeah. Fitness is so important. I can see how it's helped you through all these years. But another thing is, how do you maintain your voice? Do you have any contemporaries you share like vocal cord maintenance tips with, or how do you maintain such an amazing instrument?
Well, I had years of lessons. You know,
Hmm.
my father pushed me with all that, and I had years of lessons. But I think, as I've talked about before, I had to throw away a lot of the things I learned because a lot of the things I learned in terms of how to perform were not creative enough. They were old school. And like one of the things was you have no breath in your voice. Well, the breath is a very powerful part of singing. So in terms you can accentuate the breath. But the truth of the situation with me is that it's completely adrenaline fueled, and it's all like life force. It's all just energy from being alive.
Right.
And there isn't any, um, there isn't any formal maintenance or lessons or any of that. Like if all the years I went on tour, like in Swans and even on my many tours I've done, I do jack. I show up at the venue, boom, I'm singing. I don't do any warm ups. I don't do anything. And I think that, it's all just from the gut, I would say. It's like this mental image. And that's what drives everything.
Right. Just being involved in the artwork, contemporaries, musicians, people that you got to pick their brains or spend time with that made them pressure on your artistic life.
In terms of, you know, vocalizing, I mean, there's just too many. I mean, there are people
Hmm.
that I haven't met. I mean, there's people that I just listen to, like Maria Callas and Janis Joplin
Yeah.
and Marianne Faithfull, and I mean, people that their voices they make them their own style. They approach things from their own maverick way, and so I think the whole maverick nonconformist view, like where you look for another way, you look for a different way, a different mode. But certainly Michael was a huge mentor to me and taught me so much. So I mean, it's I've met so many people that it's kind of hard for really kind of answer the question because I've met so many artists.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's next? I mean, what do you see? What are you working on now? What are the upcoming releases and tours? And selfishly, are you going to be involved in any future Swans Selfishly to me, meaning, are you going to be influencing any
Well,
future Swans?
yeah, I mean, the time when they were touring and they played Terminal West, and Michael just, hey, you want to come down? So that was a surprise, you know, and I went down there and did Blood in Your Hands. But I mean, I don't know about that. I think that the next thing that we're doing together, which is actually a big deal, is, again, this is assuming the world doesn't blow up.
Right.
We're supposed to be performing at the same festival. I think it's December. Anyway, it's in Berlin. And so he, with Crystal, just the two of them, and I'll be performing at the same event. So that's the next thing I know of in terms of anything related to him.
Um,
And you know, I'm sure that's going to be pretty intense for the audience. I think that in terms of me, I mean, just pick your project. Let's see. Right now, I'm working on 3 songs for a short film. I am finishing up the score for a independent film that I was asked to do over a year ago, January last year, and that was January of last year. And then I immediately asked Chris Forrest to work on it. Because, you know, we work really good as a team, and we did The Path together, which won. I mean, that won, you know, best music for a game in the Global Game Awards in Bilbao, Spain. So I asked her to work on it with me, and she's brilliant. You know, she's a graduate of Mills College. She's an engineer. She's an incredible musician. She's astonishing in every way. So we're working on that. She's actually putting it together to the visual. So what we did is we started working on that, came up with all these ideas. I tapped Thor Harris to play some instruments for it, and she's tapped some of her friends, a cellist, different people, Jackie, who was in Amber, and so then the whole team behind this film disappeared, and I guess they were getting their funding together. So then they bobbed up again. So that's finalizing. So that's 2 films, short films, and then I'm doing a rock group. I'm doing a cover version they asked me to do on an album. So then let's see what else. Oh yeah, and I've started another solo album. I've got 6 songs that I've got started there, and then, in addition to that, I will be going into rehearsals and getting ready to go on the road touring with Joseph Van Weissum, who I'm a huge fan of his work. So this is a thrill, a dream to tour with him. So I am fingers crossed that will actually happen. And, you know, so that would be November into December, all throughout Europe, starting with 2 shows and 2 shows in London and 4 other shows throughout England, and then moving on to Belgium and then Sacrificial Cake coming out on the Circle, and and then I did something with Black Leather Jesus, and that is in pre-order vinyl. What I did was that's a split. They're on one side, I'm on the other, and so I edited Walls. The Walls Are Bleeding. I edited that, and I had the individual files, and I created something completely different. So I'm on one side, and they're on the other. And I was happy because when I asked him about the cover art, I suggested I would do one of my energy field paintings for it, and so that's on the cover. So I'm really excited to have that on a record.
And is that a vinyl? Is that a vinyl only release?
Yeah, it's a vinyl. No, well, I think they have it on their Bandcamp, but Summer Interlude Records, they're called. But they're Black Leather Jesus is a collective of electronic musicians.
Yeah.
So and they also beat sheet metal, and they're like a modern industrial, industrial music type band. So I'm really so I thought, what can I do that would fit with that? And I thought I'll go back to, that era, something I recorded in '83, and I'll manipulate that. So I was really excited to to do that. So it's not necessarily new, but it's a new, radically new mix.
Yeah.
That thing in its edited version, the walls, that thing down when it was edited to like 5 minutes from the 2 hours I think it originally was, that, that thing was put on a card and it was played during lunchtime on
so
WREK.
great. Yes.
WREK. And so people would be on their lunch break, businesses, and they would call the station all upset, like, "Oh my God, a woman is being murdered! Oh my God!"
It's one of the most intense things I've ever heard.
That's so funny.
That's so great.
Well, that was recorded at REC. That was recorded in the control room there on their Scully reel to reel.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I never knew that was recorded there.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah, I was really good friends with the people that were doing the experimental shows, Conceptions, and then it was changed to Notes from the Underground. And so yeah, that was a whole scene, of Arthur Davis and Jay Wiggins and the Young Schizophrenics, and there's a whole electronic scene that was happening, experimental scene that was happening in those days.
Right. Well, you sound so busy, and it's so good to know that you're out there creating all this wonderful art and going to be able to tour, fingers crossed, this year. Jarboe, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Is there anything that you'd like to impart to our listeners? Any parting shots or anything?
Well, thank you for having me on, and just thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, please come back on sometime when you put out a new record. You're on this run that I think is just supernatural, especially all the stuff you've released in these last years. It's just amazing. So thank you so much for doing this. I truly want to thank Jarboe for her kindness and her time coming on our podcast. It was a real delight to talk to her. And I do, as I mentioned at the top of the show, recommend you check out her vast catalog and Illusory, which she mentioned to me is her favorite thing she ever did. I would really recommend you check that record and just go backwards. So thanks for listening tonight. I'd like to remind you that we will be announcing our live tapings here coming up soon. We'd love to see you out at that. And it's going to be a fun night. Think one of those 70s variety shows on acid, except I won't be on acid, I assure you. We'll stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.